Hello and welcome to a new episode here on the Wars Rebellion podcast. I'm your host, Niels Eichhorn from warm, sunny North Germany, but apparently not as sunny and hot as my co-host, Andrew Haux's Portier is today, with the 40s hit in Celsius, which is bloody warm, without air conditioning, which he does so have. But today we are doing one other of our 20th anniversary episodes, and we got a very special guest today, award-winning historian of all things, who also has, as I figured out, a Wikipedia page actually, which is quite amazing. Um, so today we have Amy Murrell Taylor with us from the University of Kentucky. She has a PhD from the University of Virginia, and we are going to talk with her about the anniversary book, which was her dissertation as well in modified form, and which is published by the University of North Carolina Press, The Divided Family in Civil War America. She also, I should say that because that is the other big book, she also has published Embattled Freedom, Journeys Through the Civil War's Slave Refugee Camps, which, among other things, won the Now Book Prize and the Tom Watson Brown Book Prize as well. I was in the audience for that. Um, Very interesting speech, and maybe we can at the end talk a little about how the organizations that you gave the money to received that and what they have done with that. But let's start with your family history. So how does one come to say, I want to write my dissertation about family?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, both of you. I was really delighted when you reached out about a book that I haven't thought about in quite some time. So this really gave me a chance to go back and reflect on it. You know, you say it's the 20th anniversary, but I really started working on it in the 90s, as you said, as my dissertation. So this goes way back for me. And how did I get there? Well, I guess it goes to how I got into Civil War history itself. I really started as a historian in my undergraduate days thinking a lot about women and gender. And that's what led me to Civil War. It was actually in an undergraduate class taught by the incredible Anne Fearer Scott at Duke University. It was I was in the last undergraduate course she taught before she retired, and in that course, I started really digging into the Civil War and looking at family collections and just got really intrigued with, as a family and gender historian, a social historian, how do moments of societal disruption, moments that's when it seems like things are atypical and not quite right, like a war, like a civil war, how do they expose the rules of a society? How can a moment like the Civil War actually become an ideal laboratory for somebody who's trying to understand the really subtle things about how a society and a culture thinks about itself and what makes it tick? So that's very abstract sort of explanation, but that's just to explain how the two went hand in hand. But then when I was in graduate school, how did I get to divided families? Well, I had always paid attention to these stories that you'd hear about, some brother and brother and so forth. And I remember my grandfather had given me a book that he owned. It was published in the 1880s, and I wish I had the title in front of me, but it was like Anecdotes of the War of the Rebellion. I mean, it was one of these anecdote books that just kind of grabbed stories from newspapers and different things. And a lot of it was kind of what they considered at the time to be wild and crazy stories of the Civil War. And there were many about divided families and their confrontations in battle and that sort of thing. So I think I always had that in the back of my mind and wondered, are these true? Like, did this really happen? And after kind of a long about way, I was originally going to write a dissertation on religion in the Civil War. I eventually dropped that and decided to take this up and to see what I could do with it and what I could make with it. So that's how it came to be.
Well, in your introduction, you talk about it was the first full scale book manuscript on uh, family, on the divided family. I mean, it's something that that you talk about it being in the lexicon, the common lexicon of Civil War studies about the house divided, brother against brother, fratricidal war, using the family metaphor to describe things, but it's hard for me to imagine that it took until 2005 to have
Mhm.
a volume published that
Yeah.
actually brought that story together.
Yeah. And I shared that with you at the time. It just hadn't been taken seriously. I mean, I think that people maybe deep down didn't really believe these stories were true. Kind of we like to think of the Civil War in terms of some neat divisions between Union and Confederacy or North and South. And we like our binaries, we like our categories. Um, it's hard to imagine then that a family wouldn't just fall into one camp or the other. Maybe that was part of it. But I think it also reflects where the historiography or how the historiography shifted over the 20th century. Writing a book about divided families in the Civil War, I mean, I just can't imagine anybody doing that in the early 20th century. I mean, family history, um, not really taking off. It doesn't really take off until the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the United States. Um, you know, that the idea that these families would have anything to tell us about the war was kind of maybe inconceivable earlier in the 20th century. So I think, I came around, I started in the 90s. So I entered the field thinking about this after several decades of work on family, gender, women. I had the benefit of this growing historiography that was taking this aspect of life seriously, and so it became more imaginable and thinkable for somebody like me than it would have been, much earlier in the century. I don't know if that's the full answer. Maybe you all have thoughts.
I mean, it was just something that you mentioned it early on, and it's true that there wasn't. I mean, you have examples of your anecdotal histories. You talk about your. For me, the what immediately pops into mind was the whole body of literature in the post-war era of reconciliation and across the divide, and you have these families, you have scorn lovers, and you have all these wonderful stories of. It was just a great atmosphere for selling books and stories like that. Um, but I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, I find it odd that I just find it funny, not odd, funny that there had been nothing that had actually studied that as a phenomenon, and actually with concrete examples of real family stories.
Mhm.
Which, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and maybe we can come back to this too. I always thought that maybe more people there would be more books to follow because I think there's more to say, but they haven't followed. So I don't know what that
that
says
was another
either.
one of my questions.
So yeah, I was exactly saying wanting to ask the same thing that it's sort of like your book came, and I remember you and a few others did sort of Holly, I think, was on it, and um few did sort of this roundtable on like family, especially with like African American family, but it's like it doesn't feel like a lot of people have done anything.
Yeah.
Like I mean this like we had Ben Severance with the Tennessee books that he wrote 20 years ago on one time, and he kind of was very reluctant to kind of join us because he kind of felt like, I don't feel like I had that impact. So I guess
hmm
let me ask this way. How do you feel like? Do you feel like disappointed that not more took up sort of
Well,
you as family, or do you feel like, well, I'm the authority then?
well, I guess that's how I can comfort myself. You know, I think one thing that's happened since I published the book, it's not that family history has gone away, but I think it's gone in some different directions. And this kind of book is not really what people are writing. One, it's gone in a more micro historical direction. with a lot of studies of particular families. And so there we do see some studies of family division. I'm thinking of Steve Barry's book about the Todd family. That's a good example. He did take up this theme and this subject, but just did it in a very different way. So I think, the ambition to write books that kind of characterize a whole group of families, that's just not where we're at. And I think the microhistorical sort of approach might be partly driven by, I mean, it could be a number of different things, but one of it may be that we're also in kind of a genealogical moment as a culture and a society. I mean, look at what Ancestry.com has done.
Mm.
Look at what the television shows like Finding Your Roots have done. I think there's a lot of interest in studying individual families and seeing how far we can get and what can an individual family tell us. And so that's just kind of asking different questions and kind of taking things in a different direction. Um, so that may be part of what is going on, if that makes any sense.
Well, to me, when you were describing your in working in the 90s on gender studies and women, it seems like this is kind of the logical next point, because I don't know how much women's studies and gender studies in Civil War history, in terms of Civil War history, uh, are they outdated? For me, it seems like it's something from the 90s, maybe early 2000s, and
Yeah.
kind of moved on.
So this actually kind of gets back to the question Niels asked, which I forgot really to answer, which is about impact. Um, so historiographically, this book, The Divided Family, I think it didn't have the sort of impact of changing the conversation, steering it in a new direction. But I think it's more of the enhancing a conversation that was already taking place and providing a different angle on it.
Mm.
And I see that in two ways. One is getting to what you were just talking about, Andrew, about gender in the Civil War. When I was working in the 90s and then published this in 2005, one of the big concerns of the gender historians of the Civil War was basically to rethink and re-show where war took place. To basically explode the idea that there was a public world of war that took place on battlefields and in political halls and legislatures. And then there was this private world that was somehow apart from war. That was the family. And that was the kind of underlying, sometimes unarticulated assumption of much Civil War historiography, and really not just Civil War, but American historiography for years. And the gender historians, their big, goal and the focus is to show how interconnected these worlds are. That we can't really understand what's happening on a battlefield or in the legislatures without understanding where these people came from and how their identities as men, as members of families, as members of households, are constantly sort of impinging on their thinking and on their decision making and on their actions. So, blowing up this public private divide, I think Divided Family comes out, and that's really kind of one of the central themes of the whole book is how here we have these, and I should emphasize, we're really talking white, more elite, middle class at least families in this book. And we could maybe come back to that. But they idealized the world in terms of this public and private divide. That's their aspiration. That's what they're how they're trying to live. And what they find in the Civil War is this collision between the two, and they're constantly trying to pull them apart again. And so I think the book, what it just showed in a different way, the way in which 19th century Americans were constantly wrestling with, the relationship between their public and private worlds, and never really quite achieved what it was that they were aiming for. So I think the book really enters into that conversation. And I can also bring up, I don't know if you want to shift in this direction yet, but sort of unexpectedly, the book was also in conversation with another literature that was just starting to really come out when my book came out, which was studies of the border states. The border
Mhm.
states kind of became a hot topic in the early 21st century. And my book ended up being part of that conversation in a way I hadn't really expected. So, kind of getting us back to impact, that's where I would see where this book ended up having um, some role and some place.
Yeah, for, I totally agree with that. Because in the from I'd say 2000 2010, there were a lot of books that came out that were addressing the the divisions, the not clean cut borders, boundaries between families, between neighbors, between um, within towns, within communities, especially like you're saying in the border states. It reminded me of Robert Tracy McKenzie's book. I'm trying to look at my Lincolnites and Rebels, where he talks
Mhm.
about a study of Knoxville um, during the war. And I mean, that's essentially a city that could be considered a family. And you're talking about the same thing. And it came out, I think, in 2005 or 2006.
Mhm.
This one.
Yeah.
So, I
Oh, there
mean,
was Patrick Lewis's work on Kentucky, Ann Marshall, Aaron Astor
yeah,
on Missouri and
yeah.
Kentucky, Christopher Phillips later on, Stanley Harold's Border War. I mean, just suddenly there was this flourishing.
Well,
Uh,
and Bill Freeling's The South versus the
oh
South
yeah,
as well, which is
absolutely.
foundational in its own way. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So suddenly here's this wave of scholarship that wants to look at this region as not exceptional or not kind of a region of moderation, but instead one that was intensely divided, and those
yeah,
divisions mattered and really impinged on the larger war in ways we hadn't appreciated. So,
yeah,
and when I wrote my book, I didn't set out to write about the border states. I was just, as I said, trying to understand, were divided families real? But then when I started surveying archives and traveling the South, the the collections I found, the evidence I found, didn't 100% concentrate in the border states, but largely did, particularly in Kentucky. And that, I mean, I guess it didn't fully surprise me, but it just wasn't what I intended at the start. And in going back over my book for this conversation, I noticed I don't play up the border region context maybe as much as I could. And maybe if I was rewriting the book, I might draw that out even a little bit more strongly. But nonetheless, I think it has had something to say to the border state historians.
Yeah,
go ahead,
and
Niels.
yeah. Well, I kind of like two questions there, so I give Andrew a break. Because you already mentioned like the archive. So how like you have so many stories in there, so many people that you've like found. How do
Mhm.
you find that?
That
Like,
was a question I
do
had as well. In
do you
fact, that
go
was
to
my
the
next
archive
question.
and they're like, let me see your family papers, and
Well,
they roll boxes and boxes, and you're overwhelmed for a month.
yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I've always said that if I wasn't a historian, I would be a journalist
Hmm.
or a police detective or maybe a psychologist, all of which are interested in sort of understanding and digging and understanding human behavior. But really, that sort of investigatory kind of thing, that's just the way my mind is. So,
Hmm.
um, how did I do it? Well, this was back in the late 90s when we didn't have finding aids digitized yet.
Yes.
So it was card catalogs. But the first thing I did, this sounds so old fashioned now, but I remember I went to the reference section of our library and found there used to be a guide to archives, local and state and big ones, and it had contact information. So it was like just a sort of address book
Hmm.
almost of archives. And I just went through them and I sent out tons of letters to all of these archives. And basically, like, do you know of anything in your collections So I started with the archivist, where we should always start,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I started getting these lovely letters back. I mean, again, it's so old-fashioned. We didn't even email each other yet. Um, and I got lovely letters back, sometimes with photocopies stuffed in the envelope, but oftentimes a list of, yes, you should come to our archive. Here are some of the collections I'd recommend that you look at. So there was that, and then there was just going through card catalogs, and I don't even fully remember what subject headings I would start to look at. There was not a divided family subject heading that
Wouldn't that
that
have been nice?
I know, wouldn't it have been? But there wasn't, so you had to be creative. Um, it all eventually just started coming out of the woodwork. I think talking to archivists was especially crucial because it also kind of got word of mouth going.
Mm,
And some of them were like, my friend over in this archive might be able to help you or might know of
mm,
something. And it just, that informal network of archivists
mm,
really was useful. So yeah, that's largely how I did it. Obviously newspapers were important too, but there again, we didn't have the newspaper databases, so I just chose certain papers and started going frame by frame,
mm.
looking at headlines and
We're talking microfiche, right?
Film.
microfilm. Yeah.
Microfilm. Yeah, with the yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember, I can picture the spot in UVA's library, the microfilm area. All the grad students were there. It was social because all we all had to use microfilm on for everything, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just a bit of detective work, and
Mm,
still to this day, I keep coming across more examples, more
mm,
collections that could have incorporated. But at a certain point, as you mentioned, it was a dissertation. I had to draw the line somewhere,
Yeah.
and this is where I'm at. But because I keep encountering more, that's why I come back to why haven't more people written about this? Because there are more stories out there that need to be told.
Mm.
Guess towards the end we can maybe ask how would you write a book differently today than you did 20 years
Yeah,
ago? Um, but you do have a couple of famous people. I think it was Breckenridge was one of the famous ones that you mentioned. So were those sort of like starters where you kind of were like, okay, there are some famous ones that we already well know about that can be sort of
yeah.
my go and then I can dig from there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I did do that. It's hard to remember after all these years, but um, you know, so many Civil War studies.
Mm,
Battle Cry of Freedom, I'm sure McPherson mentioned some, and I mined some of those names from
mm,
it. Or, you know, divided families have always been sprinkled in and mentioned,
yeah,
even in an offhand way
mm,
in many books. So I was keeping a list, and I think that did help me in
mm,
some cases. And then I went looking for the papers. Some of those Kentucky, I mean, it seems like every member of Congress or prominent political leader in Kentucky had a divided family. I mean, once I
Talk
got
about
to Kentucky, I
Crittenden.
just started, pretty much searching any prominent person, and something, pretty much came up. Um, that was pretty incredible, actually.
So,
you gonna ask Andrew?
well, it was I've just I don't know if talked about the Crittenden family.
Mm,
Yeah, which it's a no-brainer, but it's there and it really draws
Yeah.
in. I mean,
Well,
they're
that
very prominent. I mean,
that was so interesting. Of course, we all learn about Crittenden as one of the great compromisers from Kentucky and the author of the Crittenden Compromise. So that's how I knew him. And so it actually did surprise me when I first thought about it, I was surprised that he had a Confederate son. And then I was like, well, maybe this does help to explain some of his impulse to
mm,
compromise and to find some common ground. But that story I dug into, he had papers at the Library of Congress. But I think some of the most interesting material that came up was in the newspapers because he was so prominent, and
mm,
this happened to the prominent members of divided families. He started getting some real blowback in the press for having a Confederate son, and some of his political opponents in Kentucky particularly George Prentice, the editor of the Louisville Daily Journal. I write about this in the book. He um, writes in his newspaper about, look what's happened to John Crittenden. How can he let this happen? This does not reflect well on him as a father and his character, and, really attacks him.
Mm.
And what I found interesting, I then found Crittenden's private letter to Prentice responding to this, basically saying, he's sort of straddling this line. He tries to defend his son, but also get Prentice off his back. And he leans back on this idealized notion that family life is something separate from
Mm.
politics and war. And, and tells Prentice, like, can you help me keep this private? Like, please respect our privacy,
Mm.
is what he says. And so he's really struggling to kind of, separate the
Mm.
war from his family. And what I find is an interesting postscript to that is it turns out Prentice had a Confederate son too. And then he gets dragged through the mud of Parson Brownlow's newspaper in Tennessee.
Yeah.
So it's just, um, you know, you could get kind of carried away with sort of the drama of these
Mm.
stories, but I think there is something serious in all of that. And they're really kind of wrestling with the role of family in shaping the character of a man and of a leader. And some of these men felt very much attacked and very vulnerable when a family member went to the other side. And
Mm.
it was going to be harder for them to kind of have the status and the respect of people around them that they sought.
Mm.
Um, One thing that really intrigued me as I was doing my own research, um, using Find a Grave, which is a fantastic tool. Looking at East Tennessee, the number of families, Unionist parents, then looking at the kids, you see veterans, but then you see a Confederate flag and then you see an American flag. The number of families that had kids on both sides. I mean, you really have these divided families, and you don't have the stories, the backstories necessarily. Sometimes you get obituaries where they mention, a little bit,
Mm.
but nothing like what you're talking about. These great narratives. I mean, these great family histories of what the war looked like on the home front in families that were actually torn apart.
Mm.
Yeah, but what you just mentioned, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Um, what you just mentioned is fascinating to me, using Find a Grave to uncover some of these families. I
Mm.
mean, obviously I didn't have access to
Right.
to that
Yeah.
at the time, but I hadn't even thought about that before. Um, so I guess you're seeing the image of each of their gravestones. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily buried in the same cemetery. They're probably
Right.
buried in different cemeteries,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
still, interesting how this technology is helping to reconstruct
It is.
these.
Yeah. And you have, yeah, and sometimes, people are, you have grandchildren or great grandchildren, coming to, pose. I have a picture back there with uh, a great great grandson of Confederate, one of these Confederates, from a Unionist family, whose the kid is probably 9 or 10 years old. He's dressed up in a Confederate uniform with a kepi and everything, and celebrating this, this Confederate member of this family that was a Unionist family. The brother the brother fought for the Union and had a, what do you call it? The congressional, the Army headstone, the normal Army headstone, and this guy has the Confederate one with the pointed top. So yeah,
Ah, interesting.
so yeah, I mean
Wow.
it's really funny, and
There's an
people think it's,
article there, Andrew.
yeah,
Or at
yeah,
least
You
a
should go
blog
write
post.
it.
yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
he needs to defend his dissertation first.
Yeah, I've got to finish that
Okay,
first.
okay.
Yeah.
When is that again?
Oh, don't talk about it.
Okay. Oh, we got a
I
break
know how that
someday.
feels. That feeling I haven't forgotten. That
Well, you
sticks
Yeah,
with
it's nerve-wracking.
you.
especially in France.
Yeah.
No, France is great.
But back to away from that, you do have, try to remember here, I think it's towards the end of the book. You have this one brief section on African American families, and you
Mm,
already mentioned that, like, you predominantly the families you're looking at are white, middle class, upper class, sort of. And I kind of wondered, like, what would you have wished you would have been able to do more with that, or would you have liked to do
yeah.
more, like found more families? Do you feel like I'm thinking here of Hillary Green's work, for example,
Mm.
like do you feel like people have taken that in the right in sort of and run with it, or do you feel like there still needs to be more done on sort of in general African American family?
Well, definitely there's more to be done. Absolutely. That chapter, there is a little story. That chapter was not in my original dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was one that, um, you know how review processes go with a press. The
Yes.
reviewers have their thoughts and their suggestions,
Hmm.
and the publisher grabs onto it.
Yes.
And I was really pushed to add a chapter on Black families. Now, I don't want to suggest I was resistant to the study of Black families.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all related to why I wrote the second book that I did. But at the time, I was really just acknowledging that I was looking at political division in families. And I didn't see that in Black families unless you believe there were Black Confederates. And I did not. I've been influenced by Kevin Levin's work. So we
Which
can
came
talk about
after
that.
your book came out.
I know, but
Just for
it was something that was already coming up and
yeah.
being talked about. So, I was like, well, I'm not going to find Black families who are experiencing what these white families were. But it's true that war did stress these families, that Black families were not unitary in their thinking, that they sometimes looked at the questions of the day differently, even if we don't see it as a conventional political divide. One of the primary ones I write about is the question of how to pursue freedom.
Mm.
And there were big differences in a family about whether to flee to Union lines or
Mhm.
not, or whether to stay. And so, this is a very different kind of division,
Mhm.
but it was felt no less intensely by these families. So I don't want to say I don't think that it's not that I think the chapter doesn't belong, but it was one where I was really kind of pushed in this
Mhm.
direction. And when I was done, I was still a little bit unsatisfied with it. I felt like there's much more to say,
Mhm.
that I didn't fully do justice to those families.
Mm.
And that is precisely why I went off and wrote the second book that I did, which Embattled Freedom really is the study, the more intensive study
Mhm.
of Black families in war, that gives it the treatment and the attention that I didn't feel like I quite did in the Divided Families book. And so yeah, one grew out of the other. And to get back to your question, even after writing that book, there is so much more
Mhm.
social history of freedom seeking families that can be written and is being currently written. I mean, there's some great work. I think Judy Giesberg's new book, Last Seen, is really exciting. Um, and I know there's some dissertations in progress right now.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, yeah, that was an interesting experience. As a writer getting pushed in a direction, but
Mhm.
then it really kind of opened up something even bigger for me later. So,
It did feel kind of frustrating because it was more succinct, I think, than the other chapters, and it
mhm.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
left,
Well, and
I was left wanting more.
there, you know, I confronted the what you could call the archival imbalance. So, by working with these pretty fairly elite, in many cases, white families, I had access to this voluminous correspondence. I mean, some of it is incredible. I just, looking back at the book, I couldn't believe some of the quotes. I mean, some of the and some of their letters were long, and they're doing exactly what I had hoped when I set out, which is in this moment of disruptive war, they're articulating their expectations for one another, how they idealize family. I mean, they're very, are, eloquent in that respect. But of course, we don't have that for somebody seeking freedom from slavery. We don't have long letters that they've written, these extended discussions about their values. We have a lot, we have, glimpses. We have mostly, though, just evidence of their actions. And that's meaningful, and you can read a lot in their actions, but they're not telling us what they
Right.
think in the way all the other families in the book did. So that was frustrating to me. And that was something in my next book I tried to set out to really like, how do you really get to know the people um, when they have left behind so few words?
Yeah.
So that does, I mean, that partially explains the succinctness of that chapter, but I think it does sit there in the book, like reflecting this serious imbalance um, that was out there.
Well, I
I mean,
guess it's just the nature of things, right? Like
yeah.
you have a completed manuscript, and then the reviewers are like, "Oh, you should do this," and it's your first
Mhm.
book. You have no like, you don't feel like you can stand up to the editor and be like, "No, I don't think I
Yeah.
should do this,"
Yeah.
and you end up with like, I have to do a year of extra research now to write this chapter.
Well, and here I got to give a shout out to the Freedmen and Southern Society Project
Mm,
and their volumes, Freedom, A Documentary History of Emancipation, because that did jumpstart things
mm,
for me. And that opened up my eyes to what was out there that would be so helpful with my second book. So, yeah, it was writing the chapter was just, it was, I don't, again, I don't fully regret it because it
mm.
forced me to do some intellectual work that I hadn't been doing, changed probably the course of me as a historian. So the reader comment, though at the time I was a little frustrated, in retrospect, maybe it was a really good thing for me. I don't know.
Um, I had a question about the publication. Um, Obviously, I don't know how publication really works, but um, so you did your PhD at the University of North Carolina.
Virginia.
At Virginia,
Oh, sorry. Okay, then never mind. My question is because
UNC Press.
the book is UNC, and my question was going to be pretty silly actually. It was going to be, well, did what was it easier to publish in your
Oh,
University Press of where you actually defended your dissertation? But
yeah. Yeah, no, no, different. Although at the time, Gary Gallagher was the editor of the Civil War America series at UNC Press, and he had just arrived at Virginia when I was on my way out.
Mm,
But I did get to know him and made that contact, and he actually joined my dissertation committee at the end.
mm,
So,
oh, that's cool.
I did have a door opened for me, which I was very fortunate to have at
mm.
UNC Press.
So would did you have to shop around, or
Hmm.
was
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember what I did. I think I was really eager to. I thought the Civil War America series was great. It was doing a lot
Mm,
of social and cultural history of the war, so I felt like it was a really good fit for the book. So my recollection is that was kind of a goal from the start.
mm.
yeah,
To what degree I shopped around, I can't quite remember. I'm sure I had conversations.
yeah, but Chapel Hill, it seems, is the right place.
Yeah. And then I worked with them on my second book too. And that was a really positive experience too.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder though as a new historian to get into USC Press these days, from what I can hear.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, I think this is going to sound a little self-serving, but I'll just say it anyway. I think that in the last couple of decades, um, we have a new series at the University of Georgia Press that I co-edit with Steve Barry on the Civil War called Uncivil Wars. I think we've published some great work in that series and are really
Mm,
building up our track record there. LSU continues to publish great
mm,
things. So though I have published with UNC, I think there's a good, vibrant landscape of Civil War publishing
Hmm.
and some good options. And if anybody out there is that student who has just written their dissertation and is looking for a publisher, come talk to me. Happy to talk to you about our series at Georgia. I would welcome that conversation.
Well, I just emailed the editor at Georgia about my Savannah book, so
Ah, okay. All right.
it's making progress.
Great.
And I'll have to
Excellent.
comment about LSU Press later for you guys off the record.
Okay.
But you're raising your head up, so Andrew, you're next.
Oh, well, I've just got tons of questions.
Yeah, go
Um,
for it.
so you one of the comments, one of the examples that you mentioned, um, and then extrapolate is the families who divided families who used divisions within the families uh, to claim the union for the uh, claims commissions.
Mm,
I found that
yeah.
really, really interesting because there's a, I can't think of her name, published a published her dissertation in 2015, 2016.
Susanna Lee?
Yeah, that's it. Who talks about that, and that's one of the major points in her book is that you using the idea of the union and divided families to show one's allegiance
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
try to grab some money if they could.
Yeah. So, yeah, I write a little bit about the Claims Commission. I think more research and more could be said about that in the context of the claims, but this general sort of relying on loyalty by association
Yeah,
with family and sort of calling on a family member's demonstrated loyalty to prove one's own is something I saw in other contexts too. So, um, people who wanted to cross the lines and travel and had to prove their loyalty would sometimes invoke, well, I'm related to this prominent union person. Therefore, you should believe me when I say I am union, um, or even after the war, you know, people clearly relied on a family member's union loyalty to get a pardon and get other
yeah.
sort
See,
of
I was specifically thinking
support.
of pardons and getting
Yeah,
reimbursed for something that the Union Army
yeah.
when they were.
It's very interesting how um, quickly, yeah, I said loyalty by association. I mean, that is what they're really invoking here, and how quickly somebody wanted to lean on that and use it. And yeah, there's practical reasons to get themselves out of a jam or to get what they want, of course. But I think, think about it. Sometimes they're being asked to prove their loyalty. It's not always easy to prove your loyalty when you're a woman, when you're not when you're not a soldier, basically, or you're not holding public office.
Yeah.
If you're somebody outside of those contexts, how do you prove your loyalty?
Yeah.
So attaching oneself to a family member or invoking that is, I mean, for them, like a pretty tangible marker of loyalty. The problem is you can kind of freely do that even as you are, claim that loyalty to a union family member while you're going home and like sending goods and supplies to the Confederate Army. So it really kind of brings up the question of how did people prove their loyalty at a time when it was required in some very practical ways that one demonstrate loyalty to be able to travel, to be able to write letters, to be able to get what they want.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna take that as an interesting part because I really found that section that you have about the New York Daily News so fascinating of like, let me run in the advertisements letters and notices that people want to send sows and
Uh-huh.
like how do you like you I especially found it so interesting then of how the authorities had to deal with this and be like, well, is this loyal? Is this treason? Where do we put this?
Yeah, I kind of love that moment too, and I just stumbled on it while looking at newspapers. Um, So, and then I dug in and realized there was a big story here. But for anybody listening who doesn't know what we're talking about, so, you imagine these families, particularly those that are actually living on opposite
Mm,
sides of this border, they want to communicate.
mhm,
And at a time without telephones and email and all the things we would potentially use today, sending letters is the way to go. Well, at this time, if to send a letter, it had to be one page. It was, it had to have postage from both the Union and the Confederacy, and it was going to be inspected
mhm,
to make sure that its content was only family and domestic affairs. And that just, as I write about in the book, became a really difficult sort of bar for a lot of people to meet. So communication's difficult, and taking out an advertisement in the Richmond Enquirer or the New York Daily News became a simple and fast way, faster than sending a letter,
mm,
to communicate with that family member. And um, when I first stumbled upon them, I was amazed by um, sort of the economy with which some of them were taking out an ad and being able to communicate so much in just a small little space to their family member.
mm,
And I just pulled open the book because I was gonna like read one of them, but I can't even find it right now. But there's one that I quote in full that's like, to Robert, Aunt Sarah dead, money in bank in Catskill for you. It's just like, it's not even complete sentences, and it's just like so much important family information getting thrown
mm,
into this. Um, but yeah, so the New York Daily News and the Richmond Enquirer, they keep up this system. They're printing the ads that are printed in the other paper so that people
mm,
in Richmond and New York can see them and they can communicate with each other. But then Joseph Holt, Judge Advocate General,
mm,
gets wind of this, and as we know from many other contexts, he is pretty tough on disloyalty and pretty suspicious of people.
mm,
And what he saw in these ads was treason,
mm,
pure and simple. If you are in the ad talking about arranging for something to be sent to somebody or how they can get assistance, you're providing aid to the enemy. And if you are just saying something like, I love you, you're providing comfort to the enemy. So it's aid and comfort. That's the definition of treason. And so, so then it gets all shut down. So, the whole moment to me just really kind of emphasized again that how impossible it was to kind of separate family life from everything else going on in the war. They're all deeply implicated. Joseph Holt saw no way of separating. You can't say, I love
mm,
you to a family member and not be committing a treasonous
mm,
act. There is no such thing as a private world of family life. It can't exist in its own separate bubble. It's all deeply implicated in war. And so that was really kind of I guess, a moment in the book that really kind of, I think, brought home what all these families were really grappling with the entire time.
Feels like somebody should write, especially in the current environment, a biography of Holt.
Well, actually, Elizabeth Leonard did not long ago. Elizabeth Leonard wrote a
Okay,
biography.
I have to look
Yeah.
that
Really?
up.
And the funny thing is, Joseph Holt, he's from Kentucky. He had divided family himself.
Right. Now I remember him being that complete bastard, for lack of a better term, with the Fritz John Porter trial.
Mm. Mm.
Like, good God,
Yeah, he
man.
was tough.
Oh,
He was tough. Yeah. But as Elizabeth Leonard shows, I mean, I think coming out of Kentucky, coming out of the border,
mm,
explains a little of that. He's very familiar with disloyal people. I mean, that's an oversimplification of her argument, but
mm.
there's something to that.
When did she publish that? Because I'm
Oh,
looking
I'd
at
have to
the
look it
Dean
up.
Butler book.
Yeah, that came out recently.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, she's written some wonderful books and is quite prolific. I've been admiring of that.
Lincoln's Avengers, that's the one?
No, I can
Lincoln's
look it up.
Ally, 2011.
Oh, okay. So it was longer ago than I thought.
Yeah. Well, there's another candidate for us, Andrew.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that'd be great.
It would be wonderful. I
Yeah.
had
Hmm.
contact with her on the Butler book. Oh, but the going back to your book, I I kind of like the how do I best start this one? Like, I mean, in part, you kind of felt like you w waited for the McCoys and what's the other families there to kind
Hatfields.
of the
Oh,
Hatfields to kind of ride in and kind of the TV show to take off. But it feels like in contemporary times, let's say like the last 20, 30 years, that sort of this notion of this being a brother war is very, very prominent. That
mhm.
I don't know if that's a sort of lost cause attitude, sort of to kind of downplay, or if it's sort of like, oh, we're going to hang on to these two or three episodes. But it reading your book, it took me back to family vacations and like right about the time that you published, and we're working on it actually, in Disneyland, Disney World in Orlando, and there's an attraction where the Civil War section starts with this family portrait, mother's dad in the middle, the two sons in the back. And the two sons arguing over like, is Lincoln right? Is Davis right? Is slavery saying? And then the whole presentation is the Civil War as a brothers' war. And it felt sort of like you, you obviously have that in a literal, but also not quite a literal sense in the book. So I'll let you take that where you want.
Yeah. Well, I think brothers' war, brother against brother, that's been pervasive, as you say, continues to
Hmm.
be. I don't know if Epcot is still doing that two brothers
I would
thing that
assume.
yeah. Um, it does come out, and I explore this in the book too. The sort of the divided family metaphor and in
Hmm.
thinking about the American nation, why it's been imagined as a family, because that predates the Civil War. Um, and then what does the Civil War do to that long-standing association of the United States as a family? And the specific brother against brother image absolutely grows out of the lost cause, and in particular, the reconciliationist
Hmm.
impulse
Yeah.
that takes place in the or really emerges in the late 19th century. And I almost don't I don't even need to explain it. I mean, it's obvious how to imagine this as a war of two brothers is to imagine the Civil War as a battle of two principled sides
Hmm.
that had a disagreement, but so much continued to bind them together,
Right.
and so they were able to come back together as one. And of course, this framing is one that does not require reckoning with what the war was
Hmm.
about,
Yeah.
does not require reckoning with the treason, but especially with slavery. And so that's really what gives it that metaphor its power for a long time into the 20th century. This is very comforting for white Americans who want to embrace that reconciliationist view of the Civil War. But I think it's also endured maybe for, I mean, it's still, as you say, it still endures today. Why do we still grab onto that when more and more people are willing to look at the Civil War as
Hmm.
actually a rebellion,
Yeah.
actually a treasonous rebellion, not, so much a Civil War of equals.
Hmm.
And, I think um, some of it is comforting in other ways. To some Americans, they have a hard time wrapping their mind around the idea that Americans could fight this war against each other. So this is somehow comforting. Um, I think, yeah, we as Americans don't want to believe that we were on the brink of some kind of collapse.
Hmm.
And so this image makes us think, well, we were always a family. We just had this one
Mhm.
squabble. I think some people still want to see the Civil War that way. So,
Hmm.
yeah, why it endures today, that's a whole other question that somebody else should take up. There's another article for somebody out
Yeah.
there. But yeah, that was something that I really dug into. I did find that brother against brother really emerges later, that the marriage metaphor for the nation and thinking of
Mm,
the North and South as a married couple or maybe an unhappily married couple, that really was more prominent during the war and the immediate post-war period itself,
mm,
which was quite interesting. And I can elaborate on that, but you know, in short, I think that had a lot to do with how Americans were thinking about the Confederacy. Um, in these marriages, in these stories, the
mm,
South is always represented as female, the North is male, and depending on who the writer was and what section they were from, um, the woman is either this dangerous seductress or she's this pure, innocent victim of Northern brutality. So, very much sort of a metaphor for sort of thinking through how people were viewing the Confederacy
mm.
and what it represented and its intentions.
Th- One more for the brothers that you can take on with the family and
No,
marriage.
it's going to be a follow-up to yours then.
Uh,
So go
Either
ahead.
way. No, I kind of found that you have, since you have the book open, a picture on page 80 where you have like uh James Washington and George Armstrong Custer pictured
Uh,
together with that slave boy. And it's the other brotherhood, that the Brotherhood of Arms, the Brotherhood of West Pointers. So it's
mhm.
more than just like what we think of family. It's also the sort of um like the metaphysical family that they're
Mhm.
thinking about. And
Yeah, yeah, which I started to dig into, and others have written about, West Point brothers divided
mhm,
and their experience. But that picture, that photograph, and anybody listening, you can just Google George Custer and James Washington photo, Matthew Brady, and this will come up. Um, that photo really, I keep coming back to it. It's kind of an extraordinary one.
mm,
Here is George Custer, who finds that his old West Point friend, James Washington, has been captured by U.S. forces. And Custer uses his pull to get a parole for his old
mm,
friend. So there's the whole world of just the brotherhood or friendship and the way it kind of
mm,
affects some of the things that are going on militarily
mm,
too. Um, but they sit for a picture.
yeah,
And, for Matthew Brady's studio, and Washington sees this young black boy. He's a refugee or a contraband, as
mm,
they were called. And Washington says, why doesn't he come into the picture, but he should sit by me, the Confederate? You know, we have some evidence about this. Libby Custer, George Custer's wife, wrote about the scene. So there is a little bit of evidence out there about what was going on here. But, you know, it's an extraordinary picture. The boy is not looking at the camera.
mm,
He's looking downcast. He's barefoot, made to sit by the Confederate. I mean, I didn't really think through that while writing the book of what it meant
mm,
to that boy to be sitting there.
mm,
Um, but you know, the whole thing captures um, the brotherhood coming together,
mm,
but the slave boy is still going to be with the Confederacy. It's almost like a hopeful imagining on Washington's
mm,
part that, we'll come together and we'll still have our
mm.
slavery, or we'll still have the submission of Black people. So loaded.
Also, great
Um,
illustration connecting your two books.
yeah, well, interestingly, the illustration was used for the cover of the Divided Family book,
Mm,
and the cover artist took the top part of the photo. So just kind of the head and chest of Custer and
mm,
Washington, and then repeated it 3 times on the cover and cropped out the boy.
mm,
And I remember when I got the cover of this book, I said, "What? How can you crop the slave out of the
Mm-hmm.
picture. That's exactly what in some ways, I felt like I was writing about in the book when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about the family metaphor. It's a way of kind of cropping slavery out of the Civil War story by just focusing on brotherhood and so forth. How can you repeat that on the cover? Well, again, I was I needed to get published. It had to run. It wasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
So that always kind of bugged me a little bit about the cover. Yeah. So I think,
I did not
the
realize I got such loaded question out.
yeah,
Well,
UNC Press, I love you, but I disagreed with the cover. I still
well,
do.
do you not
You can
have
still publish your third book.
do you not have veto rights over covers?
See, I don't know if
That's the
things have
first book.
changed. I Yeah, not really on the first book. I mean, there may be some people out there who are better negotiators and
Mm-hmm.
better at asserting that and having some leverage. I just didn't. I did object, but I was told it was too far in the process to do anything about it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. I mean, it just, yeah. How
No,
easily, they were making an artistic decision. How
mm,
easily an artistic decision can, convey a totally different meaning.
Or can undermine the the illustration that you had chosen
Yeah,
for a
mhm.
reason.
exactly. Yeah.
No, that was like just as a side story. You have it there in the background. The Civil War in the Age of Nationalism book, and LSU had tended to pull a little further back, and it would have looked much less imposing with the statue. So we were kind of like, no, we want that. And then they were like, oh, but we need a higher resolution picture. So I sent an email. Hour later, I had the high resolution picture and was like, do it. So second
Ah,
book, it was a lot easier to do that with two
Well,
authors that were established and
yeah,
be like,
yeah.
I was going to mention your book because the cover of Civil War and the Age of Nationalism is really good with John Legg's photo. I mean,
That is a great photo. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know John Legg took it. That's great.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
It's at
Yeah. No, that's a
Gettysburg.
great cover.
You took
yeah,
it at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we may like to say, covers don't really matter. It's what's in the book, but come on.
It
Covers,
sells.
they do sell. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people do judge books by their covers.
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
So,
So, but Andrew, I cut you off.
What was I going to say? It was about
Yes.
the brothers war. Um, so Amy, you said through the 20th century. I would say even today. I mean, especially amongst the probably the neo-Confederate groups, the Lost Cause type people, the brother against brother, the reconciliationist um, narrative is still still holds true.
mhm.
Um, yeah, so that was what I was
Yeah.
going to say about that.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I mean anybody who still holds on to that reconciliationist hope, aspiration mindset is going to be friendly to the idea of this as a brothers' war.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, nostalgia.
Yeah. But sometimes unknowing, I mean, without acknowledging what the cost of that is.
That's
I
right.
think sometimes it's too easy to invoke this image of war and not think about what the cost is. And the cost is like again that serious reckoning with what
Mm.
divided um, these two
What
sides.
it reminds me that you're talking of quotes that Kevin had in I think it was Vox that when they did that Confederate Monument video, which is a great video for anyone who wants to kind of get a 2 minute summary of the
Mhm.
Confederate Monument debate, and
Yeah.
he notes in there that especially people that are believers in the lost cause, they like to see things through the personal. And it feels like that exactly when you think of the war as a brother war,
Mm,
as sort of a
Yeah.
family conflict. It really is that personal rather than sort of the abstract or the
yeah,
political or the
brings into very
slavery
concrete
induced.
terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I meet people at Civil War roundtables,
Mm,
or just members of, I guess we call the Civil War public out there,
yeah.
or even some of my students, less so among my students, but
Mm.
including them, um, the Civil War still is deeply personal,
Mm-hmm.
and they're always invoking their ancestors' history.
Mm,
And I think that has made, for me, teaching Civil War even more challenging, but in a
mhm,
good way. How do you communicate? How do you have a conversation and a dialogue
mm,
um, with someone when this is so personal? And how do you convince them to maybe see things in a little different way,
mhm.
or to open their eyes to things? And I find
To
that
take a
very
step
challenging,
back.
but I think it's part of what keeps me going. I don't know how you all feel. I don't
Yeah.
know. You're probably not doing any Civil War roundtables where you are.
There's one in Britain.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. Duncan and I did that a few weeks ago. Oh gosh,
Okay.
late May. Late May we did
Now,
a
were
session with
many
them.
of them American or were they?
Was online, so we don't
Oh,
like.
okay.
I hope to eventually go to them at some point and
Hmm.
do it in person. But I think most
Yeah.
of them are UK based. There's even a reenactment group from.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a reenactment group in Germany that reenacts the American Civil War and dresses like Confederates and plays cowboys
And they always
effectively.
choose the Confederate side, right? To reenact
I don't know why.
the mystique. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, what were you saying about getting your students to maybe take a step back, uh, a full step back from their family history to to gain a better perspective, a more global perspective of things is got to be really hard, especially
It.
here in Kentucky, where
Hmm. Yeah,
famously, became Confederate after the war. Um,
that's right.
think
That's
about
right. Yes, I will say Anne Marshall's book on that
yeah. I
subject,
was just going to
Creating a
say Ann Marshall.
Confederate
Yeah.
Kentucky, and just sort of thinking about how Kentucky evolved over time and showing them like concrete evidence of that has been really effective with my students, even those who come in with Confederate relatives or they think they had Confederate relatives or have this sort of attachment. Um, they accept the idea that there was this evolution. I mean, you can show them the facts that Kentucky sent way more men to the Union than to the Confederacy.
Mm,
You can show them that, Kentucky political leaders, how many of them supported the Union versus the
mm,
Confederacy. I mean, you can show them a lot of concrete facts that make them start to think, and then you show them the way the memory evolved over time.
mm,
Um, they get it. And, I think the key is, and I was, saying this a little bit maybe earlier, it's sort of how you talk about things and how you present things. Coming in with a sledgehammer, basically saying, we're going to demolish everything your family's been telling you. Like, that's not how you approach it. You show them the evidence, you guide them through it and see them draw those conclusions for themselves. And I think they're much more open to that. But the idea that I'm coming in and I'm, saying, oh, your ancestors are actually wrong about that. Let me tell you the truth. No, I'm not going to say that. Um, because, I respect that families pass stories down from generation to generation. It's a very
mm,
important part of the sort of bonds between the generation. And, I respect that they've inherited certain stories and,
mm.
I don't want to disrespect that too much,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Totally. Mm,
I mean, it tends to be that they get extremely defensive if you come in with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, exactly.
I at least noticed that with some of the kids in Georgia when I was still teaching down there. So
Hmm. Yeah.
they they don't like when you challenge them too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ideologically, not
Yeah.
the word
And I
matter.
don't know, I wonder sometimes about being a woman teaching Civil War history,
Mm,
if, and it's possible I have an easier time on that front. Because they sort of see me from the outset and they're like, oh, this isn't going to be the Civil War history that I thought I was getting, And if they stay in the
mm,
class, they're already sort
mm,
of accepting this is going to be a different kind of class. I
mm,
kind of think that's true with some of my students.
mm.
So in a weird way, that might kind of pave the way for me to do some of this instruction. I don't know. I mean, I'm just riffing on that. But I mean, obviously, my gender does affect the way this history comes across to some of my students in the classroom. That's for sure.
But it's sort of the way like Andrew kind of that's a little off from yours, but like I remember when I had the American Civil War history back in about my second semester in college, and it was like it was very military focused of like
Mhm.
here we're going from battle to battle. There was some political brought in. Even Dan Sutherland in Arkansas was very much sort of like going through some of the major battles. And when the one time I got to teach it as an upper level for students, I was like, no, I'm not going to talk about battles. You want to know about what happened at Gettysburg? Read the book.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do that. I very consciously was like, I want to talk about the political. I want to talk about like
Mhm.
not Gettysburg, but the New York draft riot, for example, or
Mhm.
things like that, because I felt like that had way more meaning to understand the impact of the war than
Mhm.
where was the position of the first Minnesota, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I do a lot, obviously, social and cultural history in my Civil War classes, but I think I the challenge I see or what I try to do is make them understand that this is Civil War history too. This is not just a
Hmm.
sideshow.
Yeah.
And sort of making that connection, connecting the dots
Hmm.
between what's happening in a family and then why a man is going off and fighting. Connecting those dots there help them to see, oh, this is relevant. Family history is relevant, or gender history is relevant here. I think I've found that I have to be very explicit in
Hmm.
connecting the dots for them to see that I'm not just taking them down some like sideshow.
Mm.
You want to bring us back to the book, Andrew?
Yeah, I had a question about going back to the archives and sources, and um, you you focused on the border states. When you first started out, um, kind of fishing for, casting a pretty wide net, um, as you said, sources concentrated in the border state area, in the border states area, um, as compared to the north, like the Northeast or the Deep South. Um, so you had in the border state area, in the wider border state area, all the way from from Missouri to Washington D.C. and
Mhm.
Delaware. You had a pretty good snapshot of divided families. Um, what? So I'm assuming this is just an assumption. If you look at, say, Georgia or Mississippi or even Mississippi Delta, Tennessee,
Mhm.
um, family histories would have been, or the correspondence would have been fairly pro-Confederate. There wouldn't be
Mhm.
much division. Same
Mhm.
as, say, in Boston or in, I don't know, in New England, north
Mhm.
of New York, of course. Um, so if you could map that on, say, if you had a chart, if you could put it in an Excel spreadsheet and make a graph, what would it look like? The Venn, would it, I don't know if the Venn diagram would work, but what percentage wise do you think it was undivided? Their families were undivided in the South and in
Mhm.
the North as
Oh,
compared to the border states.
Hmm.
so that's such an interesting question.
Sorry.
There are different ways to approach this one. First of all, I think that if anybody else wanted to write on this topic, there is another article or book on division in these far north, lower south areas. It's going to be a very different story than what I wrote about. I can't really give you numbers. I couldn't even give you numbers for the border states. That's a whole other subject. But um, one area that I think would be really promising for somebody to study are the people in like the Mississippi Valley, some of these big plantation owners who came from the north and
Oh
still
yeah.
had family up there. What happens to them? and their families during the war. I encountered some of them. I just didn't really dig into them, but I think that's a bigger phenomenon than than I even realized early on. So there's an intriguing family division. Um, as far as say a family that's pretty deeply rooted in, I don't know, Louisiana or Mississippi, maybe they've been there for a couple generations already. Um, the rate or the likelihood of their division is a lot smaller than in
Yeah.
the border
Mhm.
states. And how do you answer that? Well, why were Mississippi state politics not that divided?
Mhm.
You know, it's really the families kind of reflect what's going on in the state politically.
Yeah.
And so there are all sorts of answers to that. Or maybe the flip side of it is why were the border states so divided? Answering that helps to explain why there are so many divided families. So yeah, I think if you were mapping, you wouldn't see a great rate in these far north regions, but you would start to see some like connecting threads between the two regions.
Mhm.
The division plays out, you know, somebody from the Mississippi Valley, somebody in the Northeast.
Mhm.
And I think those would be really interesting, and one could even continue that into Reconstruction or really
Mhm.
into the war and Reconstruction as more and more Northerners come and start buying up or leasing plantation lands.
Mm.
And who are these people who are willing to do that? And
Mhm.
you know, I know there's been work on the carpetbaggers out there,
Yeah.
but not so recently. So anyway, I think that's a promising area,
Well, but
certainly.
I think that sort of relates also to, I think it's a family chapter. Well, everything is family chapter. Ah, that came out wrong. Sort of the immediate sort of relationships between members of families north and south, where you kind of said, I think it's sort of like the more sort of the separation of the war continues, the more sort of the family estranges, and that we could take metaphorically too of sort of like if you're in Boston, you don't have contacts family in the South, or you're in Deep South Louisiana and you don't have family in the North, you're kind of estranging from that section as well. So it feels like estrangement is sort of a big theme in kind of seeing a the family estranging, but also the country estranging from
Hmm.
between each other.
Yeah, and it grows over time, as
Mm,
you mentioned, and that was something I tried to emphasize in the book, certainly. I think, you know, some of the cases, you know, the book starts out with just actual families dividing in the border
mm,
region. And
Mm.
I think some of them early on, the division happens almost on a whim,
mm,
particularly in the cases of some of these sons who run off and join the Confederacy despite having a Union father and a Union family.
And being in
Um,
Indiana, for example.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think some of them, it was a testament to they didn't quite know what this war was going to
mm,
become. And they didn't quite know how long it would last and how destructive it would be. Therefore, they didn't quite know what it would mean to side on the other side. You know, early on, if you're viewing this as a war that's probably going to end in a few months, and, you know, it seems more like a political squabble than it does this incredibly deadly and destructive war that it turned out to be. Um, so I think over time, what division meant and it's sort of the meaning of it evolved as the war progressed,
mm.
and that fueled deeper and deeper anger at what family members had done. And you know, that fueled some deepening estrangement as well.
Mm.
Time matters here, definitely.
Well, but it also was like odd on some level in that they were like, all right, we're gonna for 5 hours on the battlefield, we'll try and kill each other, and then when the battle's over, let's be friends.
Yeah, exactly. Somehow, and this is not just men in battle, I mean, these were
Mm.
other family members too, really tried to see like this is a difference of opinion. We all have jobs to do, but there's something deeper there. This is where the real families are grappling with what the nation would be grappling with. And I I found it quite interesting after the war when so many Union people,
mm,
family members, were willing to help their Confederate family member get back on their feet, either helping them get a pardon,
Yeah.
get paroled from prison, financial help. And they're still angry. They're still angry. They might never feel the same way towards that
mhm,
family member, but they felt this sort of practical duty.
Mm.
Um, that I found quite interesting, and it was amazing how much people could, I don't know, make these kinds of distinctions, and they felt duty to country, but duty to family
mm.
was really strong.
It also felt a little bit like that old saying from political science, right? Of like, I hate Congress, but I love my congressman.
Mm, yeah,
That that like, oh, I hate the
yeah,
enemy, it's the
yeah,
abstract Confederacy, but if the enemy is my brother, different story.
Mm.
yeah. The capacity of humans like disaggregate, or
Hmm.
we hate the group, we hate the collective,
Right.
but we have the ability to disaggregate them and to view people
Hmm.
individually. And I don't know, I guess that's a good thing. I don't know, is that a good thing about human nature? And maybe we should find some hope in that today. I don't know.
Well, for me, it's also if you look at the flip side, racists tend to say, well, this guy's okay, but I
Right.
don't like black people. But,
Hmm.
Hmm.
Jim here is okay. Or
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, or a good
counterpoint.
connection. Yeah,
Yeah.
very true.
There definitely is that. Um, let's see. What else do we have on our list here of all the fun things that you have in the book? Um,
Yeah, it's a
the,
really rich book. I
it
mean,
yes.
Well, yeah, back to my detective like sensibility, I guess. When I was just trying to figure out what are all the ways I could explore this topic.
Mm.
Um,
Well,
and this is what I came up with.
well, there was also this, I think it was in the marriage sort of in the husband wife section where you have this couple that basically says, well, we disagree. I disagree with your choice of military service the United States. Well, he disagrees with her allegiance to the South, and they kind of are like, well, we'll compromise. I leave the army and we're just living privately.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, Antonia Ford and Joseph Willard. So you're talking about, if anybody knows the Willard Hotel in DC, it's the same
mhm,
Willard. Um, yeah, and they weren't really alone. You know, on the one hand, there were divorces
mhm,
that resulted, and I write about one where it was at a time when in many states to get a divorce you didn't just go to your local court, you had to go to the state legislature and get the legislature to grant a divorce. And so she has to go to the Pennsylvania legislature, which the bonus for a historian is that meant there's, a
yeah,
record of what was discussed and debated about their divorce. So that was a wonderful find, and she got her divorce. But this is a time for these white middle class elite families.
mhm,
Um, they are starting to think about marriage in different ways. At least historians of the family have long sort of traced this transition that happens at some point, though nobody can really agree when, from a more patriarchal marriage to a more companionate marriage.
mhm,
And, by the Civil War, there is evidence of some people embracing this idea that a husband and wife should be friends. They should be, bound by affection. It's not about duty and obligation. And they're little bit more equal
mhm,
in terms of their day-to-day relationship to one another. And so that was a case, the one you mentioned, where, they're clearly seeing marriage more in those terms, and in a funny way that is allowing them to embrace some difference.
mhm,
They're getting away from the idea that Antonia Ford in this case should just submit to her husband in all
mhm,
things, and she can have her own independent mind. They just can't do it publicly. they've got to be secret or a little more quiet about it. And so he resigns and they just work at the hotel for the rest of the war. So yeah, I mean that, what I was just saying is something I try to emphasize in the book, that approach these family divisions. They're shattered and thrown by a lot of them. It's very unfamiliar territory that they're in. And so they try to reframe it in a more familiar way. And they call on all their sort of family ideals about family conflict to sort of settle and deal with these. So a son running off to the Confederate Army is not really, in his father's eyes, taking a principled stand. He's rebelling against his father. That's a more familiar kind of conflict, and that's how he's going to be treated and how this is going to be dealt with. Um, so that becomes very much the coping mechanism, you might say, for
It
these families.
it does feel extreme though to say like, oh, I disagree with that. I'm going to run off and fight the armies that wants to kind of break away from your country.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's maybe back to what I was saying before. I think it's meaningful that a lot of them run very early in the war.
Hmm.
They're not running off in 1864 as much. So again, they don't quite know what the war is going to be.
Hmm.
The sons that I write about also are quite young. They averaged,
Hmm.
late teens, early 20s.
Rebellious
Um,
age.
they're at that age. We could call it the rebellious age, or they're at that age where they want to establish themselves independently, but
Hmm.
most of them are still living on their father's land. They're sort of waiting for dad to give them some of the land, bequeath it, however, and they're frustrated. And so that sort of fuels some of their rebellious spirit and makes them a little friendlier to the Confederate cause.
I'm gonna have to go in a minute.
Okay.
So I hope you guys continue the conversation after I leave.
Well,
But
we can also end it, I think. We're at almost an hour and a half.
well, I had one quick question. Quick. It's always the just before you mentioned having to, pick and choose and what ideas or what avenues did you have to jettison
Mm.
um,
Mm.
for your final manuscript or final dissertation, final manuscript?
Wow. I wish you had asked me that like 20 years ago. I would have a fresh answer. I mean, I could probably go back into my computer files and figure it
I mean,
out.
is there one that kind of maybe
There
stands out?
isn't I there isn't something obvious, though I do know I did want to take some of these families farther in time
Yeah.
and look at the long-term legacy of this division in their life, in their family life, in how they viewed the war. How did this maybe shape their approach to Reconstruction and remembering the Civil War? How can I connect these? I couldn't go that far. I couldn't do it. I just had to cut this off. Um, but I think that's a general direction. We've sort of been hinting at like other articles and books other people could write.
Mm.
Um, I do think we're getting some great family history of the post-war period, um, especially African American family history. I think particularly strong works by not just Judy Giesberg, who I mentioned, but Kendra Field, Elena Roberts, recently have done some really interesting work. Hillary Green's new book. Um, I think that more works that look at what the how families processed this war and its legacy in their lives
Mm,
might tell us a little bit more about not just why they grabbed onto the lost cause or the
Mhm.
content of what they're remembering, but some of the emotion behind it, some of the anger. We might better more fully understand that. We talked about the students who come into my class having had that family stories passed down. um, I think understanding a little more of the dynamics of post-war families
Mm.
could be quite revealing. So I'd love to see more work, more family history in the post-war
Mm.
into the late 19th century. I think there's much more to be said.
Well, then I'm gonna ask the question that I already kind of hinted at, that as sort of my last one. How would you write the book differently now, 20 years on?
Oh, wow. I think I would,
Or would you do it differently, I guess? Give
well,
easy out.
I, I, I can never stop revising until somebody tells me it's
Oh.
time to stop. Until I have a deadline. I'll revise and revise up to the deadline. So I'll always write something differently. Um, I think that I would more deeply plumb the whiteness and eliteness of these
Mm.
families. I think I sort of take it as a given. I acknowledge that that's who I'm talking about, but I'm not sure I fully thought through how that affected the way they were approaching their divisions. I think there's more to sort of, and that reflects the last couple decades of historiography. I mean, we have so much more about race and class in this war since this book has come out that has really shaped my thinking. So I think I would do that. One thing I walked away with was not only wanting to do a better job with African American families, but I also felt, this book, I was studying a whole bunch of families and trying to see the patterns among them. In some ways, I feel like that's very like 1970s, 80s kind of social history, studying a big group and identifying the patterns. Um, I walked away from this though wanting to spend more time with each family and really get to know them better individually because I do think you see a lot more that way. And I did try to do that with my next book on African American families. So um, that was my other self critique walking away from the book. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe sort of like mini biographies that kind of string together throughout
Yeah.
the books that kind of
Yeah. A little more
personalize
in
it
depth.
because, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
people kind of sometimes like that as
Yeah, we
readers.
were we were at a place though when I started this in the 90s. Again, we were just trying to
Hmm.
generalize about family life, generalize about gender, and so that's what I was, of course, aiming to do at the time.
Yeah. I'm going to give you one final question, Andrew.
I'm done.
Okay.
Well, you
My
all have had
last,
great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was a very,
it's a
very
great book.
enjoyable book. I mean, we,
Yeah, it was a great book. I mean, um, yeah, there was
Well,
so much
thank
to it.
you.
There was so much to it,
Yeah.
and I just read it for the first time in 2025. So I was coming into it cold, um,
yeah.
and you can tell that it was published in 2005, but it still
Mhm.
holds up.
Oh. Oh, well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
And
So somebody out there, get working on this subject.
yeah.
no, I mean
Otherwise,
that's I think what we kind of all agree is that it's like there, and I was thinking about that as I was reading that and prepping for the interview, is like there isn't a lot that has been done about
Hmm.
like big picture family
Hmm.
since you published.
Yeah.
Like the last one we did was Michael Green. It's like he did the Republican Party. It's like every month a book about the Republican Party during the Civil War comes out, but
Hmm.
family in the Civil War, it's not.
Yeah.
which is
Exactly.
extraordinarily surprising.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great.
There have been some good collections of essays. I should give a shout out to Lisa Frank and um, Leanne White's did Household more. They're
Hmm.
talking less about family,
Yeah,
more about household.
yeah, but but
Um,
but you're talking about a monograph. I mean, there's not.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
There we go. Well, if you are interested, it is still available. I looked it up on the UNC Press website as a paperback for $40.
All
So you
right.
can still buy The Divided Family in Civil War America. And it's also available as an ebook. So, yep, you can
Very
still
enjoyable
obtain it.
read.
Yep.
Well, thank you. Thank you for prompting me to go back and look at it because I had left this long gone. So it was interesting to go back and see what I was doing.
It can be a good or a bad thing, right?
Yeah, it's both.
Well.